Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Mike Briggs looks at cattle markets. Elaine Kub analyzes corn and soybean markets. Stephen Wegulo describes the presence of stripe rust in Nebraska. And Bruce Anderson talks about making hay from small grains. Before we get to our first marketing interview, we mentioned in our previous episode we were traveling out of the country. For more than a week in late April, we toured locations in Japan, one of the United States' most important ag customers. Here's a brief look at what we saw and why Japan's consumers are vital to U.S. farmers.
This country is the biggest buyer of red meat in the world. It's also the largest importer of corn. While Japan only has 127 million people, its smaller domestic agricultural production leads it to bring in 60% of its food. For Nebraska's producers alone, ag exports to Japan account for hundreds of millions of dollars each year. In the coming weeks, we'll look at why Japan and the United States have become such important trading partners. We'll hear from commodity groups about the shipments of corn, soybeans, pork, and beef. We'll see how industries and consumers in Japan use those products, and we'll talk about how future trade could be impacted by Japan's economy and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Overall, we'll explain why this country is critical to the success of agriculture in the U.S. and Nebraska.
Next week, we'll take a look at Japan's consumption of pork and beef. We'll then look at its imports of corn and soybeans. And finally, we'll talk about how the Trans-Pacific Partnership could impact future trade. Mike Briggs is our cattle market analyst this week. USDA data released Monday confirms Nebraska led the country in commercial cattle slaughter in 2014. This state produced nearly 9.4 billion pounds of beef in that category. Kansas accounted for the second highest total with 8.3 billion pounds of meat. Nebraska also continues to lead the nation in cattle on feed. April 1st's inventory was 1% higher than last month and 2% above last year. We talked with Mike Wednesday morning and began by asking about cattle prices approaching the end of April.
We've got kind of an interesting situation going. You've got both sides. You've got the bulls and the bears really bashing it out right now. You know, that same thing, the market falters a little bit and the funds just want to pound on it and beat it up, and yet the cash market brings it right back because the cash market's really strong. But we've got a little bit of a situation here where demand is not that good. So you've got the bears saying, well, we've priced ourselves out. You know, 1 pound too much is 1 pound too many. This thing's going to break. And you got people like me standing over here going, yeah, but there's no cattle out here. There are no fat cattle. Now, if you looked at some of the stuff in the cattle on feed report, you'll see there's not, the marketing intentions for May and June are less than last year. And last year was a short year. So in my mind, this thing's going to get interesting because you're coming right into the beef wheelhouse, coming into spring, Mother's Day, Memorial Day, all this good beef demand, and you don't have any cattle. And I think this thing's got another chance to pop.
Why do you think that this grilling season and the holidays could bring so much consumer demand for beef?
I think there's a lot of pent-up demand in the East Coast. They've had a horrible winter, a horrible spring. In fact, believe this week is some of the first nice weather they've had. I think you've got a lot of pent-up demand there, and everybody's got to remember, most of the people live east of the Mississippi River, and it's been really crappy there. And I think there's going to be a bunch of beef demand come in here that maybe is unexpected or unseen. Now, I don't have any data to back that up. That's just me running my mouth. But I just truly believe that's what it's going to be, and I think we're going to have a chance where good demand coincides with not very many fat cattle.
Explain the low numbers of slaughter numbers that we're seeing.
Well, that's interesting, and that's some of the ammunition the bears are using. We're harvesting between 40 and 50,000 less cattle a week. You would think the price would just be astronomically higher, but the problem is demand's not really there. And I believe that once again, it's because of the bad weather in the east. I really do. Well, that, and you've got an exchange rate that's not working in the favor of exports, so export's not very good. Now, I think once you see the dollar stabilize, or maybe the other currencies kind of catch up a little bit, I think you'll see some more export demand, because the thing that people are afraid of when the dollar was just on that steep increase, that chased a lot of people away. But if it at least stabilizes or maybe backs up and retraces a little bit, I think you'll see some export demand. So I think there's a lot of things in our favor, but then I'm bullish here right now.
Over the last few months, the cooler months, have you still been throwing a lot of weight on these cattle?
You know, that's a great question. January and February really hurt these cattle. Our outweights are down quite a bit because those cattle struggled because it was so cold and wet, and that's weight that you don't get back. The weight they didn't gain in that time period, there's no compensatory gain. So I think you're going to see a decrease in carcass weights in certain areas of the country because the winter was so tough. We've seen a substantial decrease in carcass weights, but you've seen that, so you don't have the pounds that you've had, and the numbers of cattle just aren't there.
That being said, this feedlot looks pretty full. Is that accurate?
This feed yard is pretty full, and it's a little different than usual because usually you have the mass exodus of calves going out in April and May. The difference is this year, last fall, we didn't buy a lot of calves because the demand for them was so big because they had rain down south, so they had wheat, so you had a lot of guys putting calves on wheat. We had a big corn crop, you had a lot of backgrounders decide to background calves. So that pulled a lot of cattle out of the market that would be going now. Now conversely, now those cattle are coming off and going into feed yards now, which is why our feed yard is fuller. My concern is we've kind of bunched those cattle up, and I'm afraid we're going to bunch up our marketings in August and September, which isn't the most wonderful time for beef demand anyway. We'll see what happens, but the deferreds kind of scare me a little bit. But I think right now, I really think it's going to be right in our wheelhouse. I really do.
Next week, Roy Smith will join us to analyze corn and soybean markets. We also have a look at those grain markets this week with Elaine Kub. For the time being, U.S. farmers remain behind their 5-year average in planting progress. The nation's growers have put in 19% of their corn, 6 points off the average, and 2% of their soybeans, 4 points behind the norm. We talked with Elaine Thursday morning and started by asking about planting progress across the country.
Yeah, it's behind pace, but I don't think it's behind pace enough that the market is worried about it. Obviously, we're not seeing a lot of bullish concern in the corn market yet, and we're not even seeing a very strong idea that acres might be switched from corn to soybeans. That was one theory put forth because of the rain in the southeast and the relatively slow pace in the southeast. But I don't think it's slow enough yet or late enough yet for anybody to really be worried about this. Your central area there in Iowa and Illinois, they have a very regular pace, about 6 or 7% per week. And I think it will be a very big week this week. So when we come back on Monday, we'll see some bigger numbers.
Let's start in the corn market. Can you explain how low corn prices currently are and, more importantly, why?
Well, even a week or two ago, they were, $3.80, so it felt like we were within 20 cents of a $4 price, a $4 at the beginning of the price. And they've really sunk through here in the past week. And it was somewhat of a mystery. And I took a look at the very large volume days when the corn was selling the worst late last week, And actually, the total open interest was falling during those days, so it seems more like liquidation, that someone was selling off long positions rather than short selling the market, which is good. I mean, it suggests that there's not actually someone in there making a play, perhaps based on the avian influenza factor, that maybe there would be less corn fed to that segment of the market. But I don't think that's part of it. I think perhaps, it just sunk and it just extended its lower price, this range that it's been trading in 2015. And once it hit new lows, it spooked some people out of the market.
Does that mean then that you have a reason to believe that this will go higher?
Yeah, I think on balance, I have a bullish tilt to this market because there's not really very many legitimately bearish arguments against it, other than the strong U.S. dollar, which has been a factor for the past month or so. I believe that's already been priced in. Overall, you've got the consideration that ethanol has been strong. The inventories have actually been coming down, this week's report showed. Livestock feeders and commercial buyers have actually been buying up corn at this price because this is a cheap price. This is as cheap as it's been in 2015, and they can lock in some prices throughout the year here. But most of all, I think the new crop market is where we might see some legitimately fundamental bullishness based on planting concerns that it is dry in the western corn belt.
Soybeans, meanwhile, had a big day on Wednesday, a double-digit gainer. They're up as we talk Thursday morning. What's moving this market right now?
Everything that has been bullish about soybeans for the past 6 months or a year is still very bullish for soybeans. So this week's export report finally showed, as we knew it eventually would, that the total U.S. pace of export sales has finally officially exceeded the USDA's 2015 projection. So as we come into May, into the supply and demand reports, they are going to have to adjust the export projection for soybeans. And it's actually being led by soybean meal. It's over $320 a ton, which is a really good sign. Like I mentioned, the avian influenza, I think you worry about the feed sector of the market being pressured by that, but since soybean meal has remained so strong, the margins for crushing soybeans remain very strong. Soybeans are actually, everything bullish about them is still in place.
You looked at the drought monitor that came out on Thursday morning, and you see that Iowa's in good shape, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, eastern Nebraska is in good shape. Why is this such an important deal that parts of South Dakota and Minnesota are not doing so well?
Yeah, I think they're very frequently just sort of discounted by the market, but they shouldn't be. Southern Minnesota is actually the number 5 corn producer in the nation. And I took a look at which areas of the United States their yield is actually finally correlated to the U.S. average yield for a DTN column. And it turns out that northwestern Iowa and southeastern South Dakota is actually the most correlated spot to final U.S. corn yield. So if it gets dry in South Dakota and southern Minnesota, it is important to the market. And, people I think also discount, in the east, they discount Nebraska because they think that Nebraska is irrigated. And much of Nebraska is irrigated, but not all of Nebraska. So this drought segment, and particularly, in eastern South Dakota, is perhaps more important than the market realizes.
Finally, we're waiting on the Fed's decision about whether or not it's going to raise interest rates. How is that playing in for corn and soybeans?
Yeah, it was actually very clear. This was the one very clear story in the market that actually seemed to make sense this week. The Fed decided, or we saw results that the GDP is not rising as much as many people expected. I think they were surprised by that. So that is pressuring the stock market lower. But the most important part for the grains is that when we believe that the Fed will not be raising interest rates in June, that they probably won't raise interest rates until September at the earliest, now that is the belief, the U.S. dollar sank quite quickly here on Wednesday and into Thursday, and probably will continue here into the end of the week. A lower dollar will support the grains. The dollar is strong for historical terms or for 2015 terms, but it's taking some pressure off of the grains, and I believe that is what's helping them rise or bounce back up here a little bit at the end of the week.
We mentioned drought conditions to the north and east. The latest U.S. drought monitor showed 28% of Nebraska in moderate drought, an increase of 6% from last week. Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Stephen Wegulo says stripe rust has been confirmed in Nebraska's winter wheat. Of the state's crop, 32% is rated poor to very poor, second only to South Dakota. Earlier this week, we talked with Stephen at UNL's fields in northeast Lincoln about scouting, treating, and the location of stripe rust in Nebraska.
It's mostly in the southern tier of counties in south central and southeast Nebraska. And it's not at a severe level yet. It's still, the severity is low, but it's widespread along the southern tier of counties in Nebraska. So it's a disease that is blown up from southern states where it overwinters, and then the spores blow up north. And so we expect that within the coming weeks, we'll be seeing stripe rust move up north in Nebraska.
How severe is it to the south in Kansas?
In Kansas, it's pretty severe in some areas where it started showing up maybe a couple of weeks ago. And actually, in some areas in Kansas, they're estimating that growers will lose up to 40% of the yield because of stripe rust.
What should producers be looking for in their fields to determine the severity of stripe rust if they have it?
So when you go to a wheat field, and we encourage growers and crop consultants to scout wheat fields starting at this point in time, when you go to the wheat field, look at the leaves. Sometimes you'll see stripe rust right on the top leaves. If you see it on the top leaves, it means that the potential for damage is there. But you also look under the canopy on the lower leaves. In many fields, you can see it mostly on the lower leaves at this time, but it will start making its way up into the canopy, and so you'll see yellow stripes of rust pustules on the leaves. That's what you look for, and so it's actually also known as yellow rust because of the yellow color of the pustules it forms stripes on the leaves, and that's what you look for to determine whether it's stripe rust or not.
Are weather conditions favorable for further development?
Yes, stripe rust is favored by cool temperatures, and that's why we see it earlier in the season. If you see rust in Nebraska in April, the chances are almost 100% that will be stripe rust. So we have cool temperatures right now, and the other factor that favors stripe rust is moisture. So if we get rain combined with the cool temperatures, then those conditions are quite favorable for stripe rust. But also, as you know, we have a lot of wind in Nebraska, and the wind blows the spores, and that's how the stripe rust spreads within the field and from field to field.
What treatment options are available for producers?
There are fungicide products that are all either excellent or very good. Most of them are excellent on stripe rust and other foliar diseases. So just the most commonly used products like, for example, Headline or Quilt XL or Approach, Prosaro, all those products are excellent on stripe rust.
What other things should farmers be scouting for right now at this time of the year?
When you go to a wheat field, be looking for other diseases in addition to stripe rust. So the diseases to look for are leaf spots. They will show as brown spots on the leaves. They start as little spots surrounded by a yellow halo. That is indicative of either septoria or tan spot. So we see those every year, and you should be looking for those. They will start also on the lower leaves and work their way up the canopy. And we, as far as the fungicide products, we recommend that you wait, scout, and do not go out and spray right away just because we have seen stripe rust. It's better to wait and keep scouting and watching for it. Then when you see it in the field, that's when you should start to make a decision to spray. The longer you wait for the flag leaf to come out and then go and apply just one spray, the better for you economically. If you spray right now, you may need to spray a second time to protect the flag leaf, and that may not be economically profitable for you.
More information on fungicide efficacies can be found on the CropWatch website. We'll link to those resources on the Market Journal homepage. The April Nebraska farmer says last year was a rough one for charcoal rot or dry weather wilt in Nebraska, largely due to high temperatures and dry conditions in parts of the state. Although more widespread in soybeans in 2014, the issue says it loves a number of crops, including corn, wheat, alfalfa, sorghum, and dry beans. The magazine says crop rotation won't beat it, and seed and foliar fungicide treatments also aren't an effective option. You can read more about symptoms and methods for managing charcoal rot in the April issue of Nebraska Farmer. Nebraska Extension forage specialist Bruce Anderson says we're approaching the time of year when farmers think about making hay from small grains. Bruce says the forages can be beneficial for an operation, but producers need to be aware of how maturity can affect nutrition and tonnage. Plus, he says there are some safety implications to the animals that farmers should consider. We talked with Bruce Thursday afternoon and began by discussing the small grains that will likely be used to make hay in Nebraska.
We're primarily going to be talking about those that were planted last fall, things like winter wheat, rye, triticale, and what could be made into either hay or silage around this time of the year.
What kind of benefit could those things add to your operation?
Well, they may not be as good as corn silage or alfalfa hay, but they can really fit a lot of situations where we do need a little extra feed for the livestock, and since we've got them growing out there right now, we might as well take advantage of them.
So what all depends in how you produce these things and how you harvest them and what you actually get out of it?
Well, I think the most important thing we need to be considering is really the maturity of the plants when we do the harvest, because everything tends to revolve around the maturity of those plants, the nutritional quality of the feed that we harvest, the tonnage that we get from it, and also some safety factors that might be considered in regards to these types of feeds.
How do you know about the timing and how much changes from, day to day?
Well, one of the things that you really want to know before you harvest is what kind of animals are you going to be feeding it to begin with. If we're going to be feeding it to animals that have fairly high nutrient demands, things like young calves or replacement heifers or yearling stockers, they may need a higher quality feed, and so we're going to be harvesting these things when those plants are relatively young, maybe in the boot stage. But if we're going to give it to dry cows, they can get by with lower quality feeds, a little less protein, so we can wait and harvest a bit later and get more tonnage off of the feed and still have acceptable forage quality.
Are there any safety things to keep in mind as you're going out to the field with this?
Well, I think that's one of the areas that people tend to overlook sometimes, especially if they're going to be making hay. We look at things like wheat, triticale, rye. The seed heads on these plants form fairly rough awns, and those rough awns can cause damage to the eyes, irritating mouth parts as the animals are trying to eat this hay. And so typically you may want to rather cut silage off of the more mature plants if they're going to have a lot of awns off of it, or cut the hay when the plants are still younger before the seed heads emerge in order to avoid some of these problems from the awns.
Is there a need to test these forages before you use them?
I think that's always a smart thing to be looking at. They can contain some higher levels of nitrates once in a while, so we want to make sure that we don't have any lethal problems with feeding them. And also getting the protein and energy content known will help us put together the rations that the animals are going to be eating on during the time that you're feeding these feeds.
Now with this week's weather outlook, here's Stoney Cooper from the High Plains Regional Climate Center.
Although widespread severe weather is not expected this week, chances of rain are on the way. Soil temperatures are finally warming, but still just a bit under normal. Welcome to this week's weather review and outlook. One 55-degree reading by Gordon, but the rest of the state is coming closer to 60 degrees. Western Nebraska hosted the rain lottery winners for the week, with Hemingford coming in at 4 inches. Several other locations in the Panhandle saw over 1 inch. Southeast and east central Nebraska also saw beneficial rains over the past weekend, with over 1 inch in Fremont. On Saturday, the morning starts in the 40s in the northwest and 50s in the east. Highs climb into the 80s statewide. Best confidence in rain is in the southeast, with chances in the southern Sandhills and western Panhandle. Sunday sees a break in rain chances. Lows in the 40s in the Panhandle and low 60s in the southeast. Nice day to get out and about. 70s and 80s prevail for the highs. Temps start out in the 40s in the Panhandle Monday morning. Upper 50s in the east help the southeast climb into the upper 70s for highs, while northern Sandhills rise to the upper 60s. 50-50 odds for rain extend from the western Panhandle to southwest and then up northeast. Tuesday is nearly a repeat of Monday, except we do get a chance for a few more degrees in the afternoon across the state. Best rain chances are in the west. big story on Wednesday across much of Nebraska will be the strong south winds. Rain chances remain, and everyone should be able to enjoy the 70s and possibly 80 by McCook. Thursday is a transition day, with rain starting to move out as a front sweeps through the state. Lows starting in the 40s in the west and upper 50s east. Highs in the 70s for most of the state. Friday sees the return of everything blowing north on Wednesday as the winds bring in drying air from the north. Not a polar front, however, so temperatures will remain in the 70s again for most of the state. Soil temps do make some headway throughout the week, with a swath of upper 60s building across the east. Farmers will be in the field and going to town. Moving to the 8 to 14 day outlook, we see hints at near normal temperatures. While the rain outlook suggests we'll see repeated chances to get wet again next week.
Thanks, Stoney. Today's interviews can be found individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on cattle prices, corn and soybean markets, stripe rust in wheat, and making hay from small grains. As always, you can follow Market Journal during the week on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Next week, Roy Smith will join us to look at corn and soybean markets, and we'll look at Japan's consumption of U.S. beef and pork. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.